com. It is April 21st, 2007. We're here every Saturday afternoon. Thank goodness we're back on in the afternoon at 5 o'clock p.m. Central Time, 3 o'clock Pacific Time, and 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. Before we get into it today, I just want to remind everybody I will be in Minneapolis doing a seminar on June 2nd, 2007. That's June 2nd, 2007. We'll be going through all three scripts that I sell. I usually sell them for $50 a piece, but for just the cost of the entrance, what was it? $50 a person. We get all three scripts, and we'll be role-playing, going through, really focusing on court procedure and making bureaucrats and politicians look like the con men that they are. Now, with further ado, I just want to bring up my guest. He is a great writer and podcaster, very prolific, and he's been on the show. I think he's got a record now. He's been on the show more often than any other guest, and his name is Stefan Molyneux of freedomainradio.com. And without further ado, Stefan, welcome back to the No State Project.
Well, thank you very much, Marc. Thank you so much for having me. And tell me a little bit more, if you don't mind, about your seminar in Minneapolis. I've sort of get the email announcements, but I don't know much about the content. Is it about legal procedures with regards to bureaucrats? If you could just tell me a bit more about that.
Sure. Well, what I normally do in seminars is go through the whole idea, showing that politics is a public relations scheme. There is no state, there are no citizens, and all that, and make a bridge and how we can get to a voluntary society. These workshops deal primarily with dealing with bureaucrats, whether it's in court or out of court. And there are three scripts that I have written dealing with bureaucrats. One is a criminal script, one's a civil script, and one is for dealing with tax agents. And the whole object of this is to expend as little energy as possible to create a context so that the best choice for the bureaucrat to make, or the easiest choice for the bureaucrat to make, is to leave you alone.
Right, so you climb a little higher in the tree so the giraffe can't nibble at your leaves, and he just goes for the lower hanging fruit. That's sort of the idea.
Right. There's a lot of people behind you that are going to be a little easier to fleece than you.
Right. That makes sense.
I hate to put it that way, but that's the way, that's just the way things go. And it's been very successful. I know that there's a patriot guy out there. We all have our detractors and hate mongers, or people who just have things that, they sit in their room typing and smoking and writing all these things that, Mark Stevens, one, I'm actually being accused of having a driver's license where I except for a phone call and a rant on my radio show, the man's had no personal contact with me, so I don't know how he even knows that, but claims that I've never won a case, or people that I've helped have never won a case. And I say repeatedly, it's not about winning cases, it's about getting the truth out, and having the truth and doing things in a certain way, yes, increases your opportunity of winning. But yeah, if anyone's listened to the show or followed anything I've done, whether it's this show or other radio shows, or they go on the forum, whatever, people have been very successful, and we may or may not post people want to look. I don't want my name and number going out on the air either, any more than you or so just because somebody can't give you a case number, it doesn't mean that they didn't win the case. It's that they want to protect their privacy, because their personal information, anybody can just go to court and punch in, a certain case number, and you can get the person's, physical address.
Right, and if your aim is to stay away from the attention of bureaucrats, wouldn't be a good strategy to do, right?
Yeah, you don't want. You see, the point that people who buy the scripts of the book or not, and if they use that, is because they want to be left alone. They want to get off the radar screen. They don't want the attention on them. I applaud them that they come on the show and they'll use a pseudonym. They'll use just their first name, and they'll discuss how they won a case and why the bureaucrat left them alone. But, that's as far as it needs to go. It doesn't have to be where you're broadcasting to the world, I live in Sacramento at this address, and this is the court case, and go and research. People don't want that.
And sometimes it doesn't matter whether you win or lose a fight, but the fact that you try and get a couple of pops in can be good for your self-esteem in a way, right? Like, even if if you can't win, it doesn't mean that you should never try to, everybody who works to make it less easy for the government is, within the bounds of the law, is not doing a disservice to the cause of freedom.
Oh, and I agree, and I thank you very much for saying that, Stefan. It's true. And the one thing that I pointed out, too, it doesn't matter if you go in and win because of the ripple effect. You don't know what effect you're going to have on people that are watching. Which has happened where in a number of cases where people have gone through and others people have watched this and it has affected them where they decided later, they're going to send the book or the link to the website and the word gets out. So one person going in court and getting fleeced helped promote the truth and get the word out there, whether it's my website or your. I mean, that's a good thing. So I agree with you, and I appreciate you saying that. One of the things I want to discuss, at least to get the ball going, Stefan, is this recent shooting that you spoke about in your podcast. Why don't you just give your website out again?
Oh, sure. It's www.freedomainradio. FREEDOMAIN radio.com, and there's a board of freedom radio.com/BOARD. There's podcasts, there's videos. It's a multimedia empire at an almost atomic scale. So there's lots of stuff for people to come and to listen to. And board members, we just passed 700 board members, which for I guess a little over a year old. And so yeah, things are going very well. Had 250,000 downloads last month.
Wow.
Well, that sounds impressive until you realize that there are 700 podcasts. So that just could be 4 guys getting the whole set. I don't know, but yeah, no, it's really chugging along. And you're right. You don't know. You just don't know who's out there listening, who has resources, who may be 18 years old listening, and some rich uncle dies and gives him $1 million, and he can use that money to promote his ideas. And you want to get to the people before that happens, or people who haven't had kids yet, who might raise their children differently when they've encountered a more rational and benevolent philosophy. So yeah, I agree. You have no idea what effect you're going to have on the world. The only thing that you can continue to work on is the quality and the rigor and the rationality of what you communicate. So with regards to that, would you like me to sort of give a brief synopsis of a fairly popular video that I did for YouTube on the VA shootings?
Sure.
All right. Well, the thing that struck me, of course, and it's inevitable, but just because it's inevitable doesn't mean that we shouldn't question it or criticize it. Without needing to say that, of course, what happened in Virginia at Virginia Tech was a true tragedy, the really, to me, quite horrible and revolting moral spectacle of watching all of the airwave personalities and all the sort of mainstream media. It's 24/7 the horrors of the Virginia shooting and the terrible loss of life, which was, of course, terrible, but what we're talking in terms of the loss of life. In America, these shootings seem to happen. I mean, I know they happen fairly regularly, but a shooting of this scale happens sort of once every couple of years, once every 5 years or so on. Well, this is one day in Iraq. And this war has now been going on in Iraq for 5 years. There is this constant drum-beating, endless sense that the lives of people who are different from us that are lost overseas in a war that we started mean almost nothing. A car bomb kills 20, a car bomb kills 10, and so on. And this is just stuff that's reported. That's just something that just rolls past us. Like it's about as much bother as a small cloud on a sunny day. But when our people, and I say this as a North American, I'm here in Canada, but when our people get killed, then there is a huge and enormous and hushed voice, teary-eyed, massive tragedy. And what I think we need to keep focusing on, and it's a hard thing to focus on, and it generates a lot of controversy, and I certainly don't mean to offend or upset people, but we really, really do need to focus on the fact that American lives are not more valuable than the lives of the people in Iraq. Our kids are not more valuable than the kids in Iraq. The 3,000 people who died on 9/11 are not more valuable than the 500,000 Iraqis who died during the embargo imposed by the U.S. and the UK in the 90s. That the degree of horror that we feel when violence strikes at the core of our society should not, in a very fundamental way, should not be different than the degree of horror that we feel when violence, which is caused by our government, our representatives, is inflicted upon another society. So I really felt very strongly that there was a way to try, and nobody wants to use these kinds of horrible situations for any sort of political purpose, But I really felt there was an opportunity to try and get people to connect to the deaths, right? To say, if this is how you feel, how do you think they feel in Iraq? Well, this is one day with 1/10 the population. So it'd be like if there was a Virginia shooting and 300 American people were shot down every single day, then the horror would be unfathomable. And this is in a society where the Virginia shooting didn't destroy the infrastructure, it didn't destroy, hundreds of schools, it didn't dislocate tens of millions of Americans. So the horror that we feel in the shooting that occurred in Virginia is a tiny, tiny taste of the horror that's being inflicted in Iraq, and that there's a way that you can use that horror to connect in a more empathetic way from the victims of your government's policy. And I think that if you get that, if people get that in their gut, then I think that they really do connect with the horror of war. And I think if people did connect with that, there would be much more of a proactive goal of reaching change with regards to the situation in Iraq. So that was sort of the gist of it, and it's, of course, been generating quite a bit of comment because, everyone says, well, we have to get rid of guns, and that's, if we get rid of guns, these shootings won't occur. And we were talking about this just before the show. Of course, because there's no conceivable way that there ever should be any form of gun control, that, of course, strikes people as counterintuitive, right? Because they hear the message of, peace and we're all brothers, and they think I'm some sort of kumbaya granola hippie guy. And then I'm like, well, yeah, of course you shouldn't have any restrictions on guns. That's the best way to keep the world safe, and the people just short circuit. You can almost see it, It's like, so you're like singing John Lennon's Imagine here, and then you're sort of the battle hymn of the NRA, and they just sort of short circuit. And that, of course, is because they're not used to seeing these two opinions together. So yeah, I think it was an interesting video. It's received quite a number of hits and quite a lot of controversy. What's been your take on that shooting and the response to it?
Well, I just wanted to point out something that you had just mentioned, that it's this whole split thinking where you're correct in you mentioning, well, you talk about peace and we're all brothers, and you mentioned about the gun control, and they don't see them as brothers. They're the towel heads or the sand jockeys. They're dehumanized, and they don't see them as brothers. And one of the things that I look at is I don't remember who actually came up with this. I'm sure you're familiar with it. That one of the reasons why it makes it easier for people to just discount or marginalize all the horrors in Iraq and Afghanistan and whatnot, and the Gaza Strip, you name it, in the Middle East, is because it's outside their monkey sphere.
Right.
Right. And it's just what happened in Virginia was a little closer to their monkey sphere, but still outside of it because they're still watching American Idol, and nothing's come to, it hasn't come to a halt. People are still going on, and maybe they'll have a ribbon or something, but that ribbon is an external thing. To me, it doesn't mean anything. It's just like when Kramer did the whole thing about not wanting to wear the AIDS ribbon,
Right.
He didn't, and I know it's just a comedy, but there's a certain seriousness there where he's right that he doesn't need a ribbon to show that he cares about something, and it's this whole trite flag-waving nonsense.
No, it is very chilling to see that, and then the knee-jerk reaction to say, well, the source of the problem is the gun that he had, which is, just a final manifestation. And we were talking about this just before the show, and I thought we made some good points. I'll just touch on sort of one of them here, that people then say, well, we need to have gun control and so on. And so many logical problems with gun control that we don't even need to go into all of them. But one of them I thought that was interesting is that we say, well, we should, obviously, when you break it down, people say gun control. What they imagine is a world without guns. And, of course, wouldn't that be a great thing? The weaponry that exists in the world would never have been developed by a free society, right? If the society were, if it was a stateless world, we would never have 200 million handguns in the U.S. We'd never have the proliferation of all of these kinds of weapons of mass destruction in the world because there's just no real need for them in a free market. They're state-based, but they sort of exist now, and people love this idea that you can just sort of wave a wand and make it all go away and there'll be no more shootings. And that's like trying to pray away cancer. This is just not a very rigorous thinking at all. And one of the sort of central problems of that is that you say, well, guns are bad, and we should get rid of them. And, of course, every anarchist and free-thinking pacifist in the world is perfectly happy. If we could tip them all into the ocean, that would be great. Oh, wait, no, then the environmentalists would be on our case. Do something. Shoot them into space or something like that. But if we could get rid of all the guns, that would be great. But the problem is, of course, that you can't get rid of guns without using guns. You can't get rid of guns without passing a law that says you must now hand over your guns. In other words, we say, well, we should not have guns in society because they're used to commit crimes. And we say, well, what is a crime? Well, a crime is the initiation of violence against an innocent civilian who's done nothing to harm you. Well, the ownership of a gun obviously doesn't do anything to harm anyone if it's just sitting in your drawer, your basement or whatever. So then we're saying, well, the cops should be empowered to take guns away from peaceful citizens because it's a crime to initiate force against peaceful citizens, right? So it's a complete logical conundrum. If you're going to say that cops have the right to initiate force, then because initiating force is wrong, then by definition the cops are criminals and you can't morally justify taking away people's guns because you're afraid they might initiate force against others. Well, that's exactly what the cops would be doing to get rid of the guns. So, I mean, there's just one of about a bajillion logical problems with the idea of gun control. But what are your thoughts on that? You had some excellent points just before the show.
Well, I agree with that, of course, that, you know, it's here they have to commit a crime to make a preemptive strike against an imaginary crime. And here in the United States, and I think this is what you may be referencing, it's this public relations crap, nonsense, whatever, that all the rights, authorities, and privileges that the government has been delegated to them by the people who are supposed to be their customers. They're so-called sovereign. And, this whole thing with these gun grabbers is that the people don't have a right to self-defense and to protect themselves with guns. And then it turns out, well, if the individual men and women don't have the right to carry, to pack heat, then where did the government get it?
Right.
And it exposes this whole nonsense. One of the things I wrote in the book is if you want to know if government, meaning just a man or woman providing a service at the barrel of a gun, if you want to know if government has a right or a power authority to do something, just ask yourself if your next door neighbor has a right to do the same thing. And if the answer is no, well, then he couldn't have delegated this mystical, magical authority to his public servants, so-called.
There's a very, I agree with that. Of course, there's a very interesting conundrum that I've also had in discussions with some of the more left-wing people. I used to be much more like when I was originally sort of a minarchist and through sort of the years, the many years of my intellectual development, I used to be sort of randy a minarchist or more of a libertarian. So, of course, because I subscribed to a certain number of cliches that I had trouble ridding myself of, I was more friendly to the right-wing side of things and less friendly to the left-wing side of things. And now that I've moved towards the ideal of a stateless society, I can see the pluses and minuses of both sides of the spectrum. Together, you put these Frankenheads together and you get one healthy visage. But one of the things that I've had in conversation with the left-wing people is that they're, of course, very much against the war in Iraq because it was the international crime of aggression as a war crime, and it was the initiation of the use of force against the Iraqis, right? So it's like, okay, well, you didn't like that the government initiated the use of force against people who weren't doing anything to threaten you. And they say, yes, that's totally wrong, don't you? And I said, yes. So how do you feel about gun control? Oh, well, we should get rid of the guns, right? And they don't see that there's a complete logical contradiction, that if they're against the war in Iraq, they have to be against gun control because both of them are initiation of the use of force against people who are not threatening you.
Right, and that's why I like to distill things. I like to get right to the heart of the matter, that no matter who I'm speaking with, 99% of the time, I'm going to reach common ground with this one simple question I have on the website, and I believe it's still the world's shortest political quiz, because it's one question. And of course, you've heard it before, and long-time listeners to the show are familiar, and it's a simple thing. Should a service or product be provided at the barrel of a gun? And everyone, 99% of people, will say no, of course not. And then from there you see all the, now you start getting into the, their logic starts to break down to their consistency. Well, what about this? Well, do you shoot people to provide? Well, all right, schools. I'll be the first one to say schools. People who run schools or provide that service. It's a valuable service. I think everybody should, it should be provided voluntarily. But so the question is. And I mentioned this on the show last week, Stefan, because you and I have spoken about this before in previous shows, and you're big on this, too, about not ignoring the gun in the room. And I'm with you 100% on that. And I mentioned it on last week's show, and this is what it boils down to. Anybody who supports a government program, let's say it's for building schools or building roads, the question turns on this. Do you believe it's justified or it's okay to shoot people or threaten to shoot people to build a road or a school? So you cut through all this political crap, you cut through all the religious crap, whatever, all this past conditioning, because now you have one spot, one really important point of overlap or where you have a similarity in your thought process, which you have to have a rational discussion. And that's where it turns. If you don't think it's okay to shoot people to build roads, then you can't possibly be left-wing, right-wing, government, mini-arc, whatever. You can't support government at all from that point.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I mean, it is the fundamental question: is there a difference between left-making and right? I mean, and of course there is, and this is the essential moral difference of force. And if people don't see the force, then they're forever going to be arguing about the minutiae of, well, yes, I mean, the government should run schools, of course, but the question is, how should the government run schools, or how could they be improved? Should we have more money, or a different curriculum, or should we hire different teachers, or should we change the summer school program? Or, you know, this endless minutiae. And as Thomas Pynchon rightly wrote, he said, if they can get you asking the wrong questions, they don't care about the answers.
There you go.
You know, it's beautiful. I mean, how should the government best spend the money they steal from us is exactly the question that those in the government want us to ask, right? You know?
Yeah, and someone had sent one of these emails. You know, you get those emails that go through, and this is what gets me. It'll go to millions of people in just a few days because people start forwarding it to their whole list, right? And It had to do with people being really upset about a hospital in Texas. And it had to do with JFK died there, and there were two other and then it had to do with all the so-called illegal aliens that were getting all these services that regular Americans can't get. And I emailed back and I said, why don't you stop focusing on what your stolen money is being used for and focus on the fact that it's being stolen?
Right. But that's what they don't want to ask, right? I mean, you know, would you like to give me your watch or your wallet? It's like, gee, that's a tough question. I like the watch. You know, but, you know, there's another question there, which is why should we be forced to give you anything? But people, they short circuit around that, right? That's very threatening to people, and it's threatening in a way that it took me. I mean, I married to a wonderful woman who's a psychologist who finally explained it to me. I think she sat me down and explained it to me very gently. When she said that in general, we're not enslaved by the government, we're enslaved by our social circle, right? And the problem is that if you begin to ask these sort of basic questions, and we know this all the way back through Socrates and other philosophers who have been punished through their society for asking the basic questions that everyone doesn't want to, you know, the whole of society is constructed as this massive, like, resistance to the truth movement, right? It's this big cult of falsehood. And when you start asking these basic questions, which are perfectly sensible and reasonable to ask, right? Should we use violence to solve social problems? A perfectly reasonable, moral, and essential question to ask. But if you ask those questions, and you then persist past the easy answers of, well, it's not violence because you vote. It's like, I don't vote. Well, it's not violence because you were born here. It's like, oh, so I can then just set up an area in my neighborhood and anyone who's born there owes me $5,000 a year? No, well, that's different. It's like, well, once you get past the easy answers or the non-answers that people give you, the sort of standard issue propaganda, people get mighty uncomfortable, and it certainly has been my experience, and I'm not the most aggressive debater in the world by any stretch of the imagination. It is the social circle that people are most afraid of, and it took me a long, long time to understand that, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why the podcasts are, at least my podcast, I'm sort of make a commercial for myself, but I think that's one of the reasons that they've got such traction with people, because I point out that it's got a lot to do with their social circle, and the government really cashes in on our fear of speaking the truth amongst each other, right? So we're all sort of whispering the truth, and everyone, you know, the slaves, and we as the slaves, are more afraid of each other. And it's the masters who sort of cash in on that, in a sense. And I think that what happens is that when people start to speak the truth, they get really threatened, and people basically start to give them the cold shoulder. And you can face a lot of social rejection for speaking the truth. And it's our fear of taking that step and possibly alienating those around us at a personal level that I think is largely responsible for the continuing increase in state power.
Well, I think that's a great observation. And one of the things, and before, I just want to say something about the troops that we had mentioned, off air when we spoke earlier, that, in my experience, at least, what I would imagine would happen with people if they, here in the United States with typical left or right wingers, especially people who are the, Republican right now, they would listen to what you and I were saying, and they would just dismiss me as just a nutcase who hates America. You, on the other hand, they would just attack the fact that you have a French-sounding name and you're from Canada.
Right.
So what?
Right, cheese-eating surrender monkey. That's my wife's nickname for me, actually.
There you go. So what possible relevance or importance could someone from Canada have anyway? And I want to go on record again as saying this because I think this goes right into what you were just discussing. The great point you just made about the social circle. How many people would get on the air and publicly make a stand like you have and like I have? And I'm not saying we're the only ones. We're not. It's someone like Butler Schaefer who, I think the man, I had him on the show when I first started last year. But there's very few of us that will publicly come out and say, in plain English, I do not support the troops.
Yeah, murder is murder is murder is murder is murder. That's sort of what I was saying in this video, that a murder in Virginia is as bad as a murder in Iraq, and that's what's going on with the troops.
Yeah, see, they call it collateral, and we've all heard this, they call it the slaughter of innocent men, women, and children collateral damage. And I'm with you. Murder is murder is murder, period. And one of the things that I pointed out a number of times before, and this is, look, everybody, and if someone has a problem with this, the number is 888-202-1984. That's 888-202-1984. And if you're in Austin, it's 512-646-6449. And this is something you cannot get away from. Every expert on terrorism will tell you that terrorism is the use or threatened use of physical violence to bring about political change. Now, the decider himself said that, one of the many reasons for going into Iraq was to liberate them, to bring them democracy, to go from a dictatorship to a democracy. So they used shock and awe. Okay, this is just the facts now, everyone. They used shock and awe. It was on CNN and CNBC. It was on all the major news to bring democracy, a change of politics. Okay, political change to Iraq. That is the very definition of terrorism, and I don't care if you're wearing an American uniform or an American flag or whatever. If you use physical violence to bring about political change, that's called terrorism. Get used to it, accept it, and deal with it from there. Because there's nothing. Just because I happen to be some schmuck from Long Island, or we've got the cheesehead on as a guest, is that what she called you?
Cheese-eating surrender monkey, that I think is
cheese-eating surrender. And yeah, so just because the cheese-eating surrender monkey and I, have said this, there's nothing. The fact that, he's from Canada or I'm from Long Island, there's nothing to change the fact that physical violence was used to bring about political change. It's called terrorism.
Yes, and Noam Chomsky's got some great series on this. An ex-anarchist now, just a social liberal, but he's got some excellent stuff on this and great analyses in some of his recent books on the history of U.S. Terrorism and U.S. state-sponsored terrorism. It is an astounding thing to me how people have this amazing slice and dicer when it comes to the government, right? So you'll get lefties, right? And we'll just pick on the lefties for the moment because I praised them earlier. We have to balance things out. But they'll say, well, this war in Iraq is terrible, the war on drugs is terrible, and this is terrible that the government does, and the military-industrial complex is terrible, and so on. And then, like, with no transition, it's absolutely amazing. You can just see this. It's like watching somebody just, like, suddenly release themselves from gravity and not even notice it. And then they say, what the government should be doing is educating our children better, and it should be taking care of older people, and it should be helping us with the health care and this and that, right? Exactly the same institution. Like exactly the same institution that is killing and doing all this slaughtering stuff overseas should be educating our children.
Yeah. Well, we got to go to a break here soon. My name is Marc Stevens with my great guest, Stefan Molyneux of freedomainradio.com, talking about violence and voluntary society, basically the nature of government in general, here on the No Stay Project on the We the People Radio. We'll be back in just minutes. If you want to give us a call, it's 888-202-1984. That's 888-202-1984. It's almost a sin to talk over that. My name is Mark Stevens. You're listening to the No State Project here on the We the People Radio Network. Every Saturday afternoon now at 5 o'clock p.m. Central Time, 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern, and thank goodness 3 o'clock p.m. on Pacific Time, coming to you live from Phoenix, Arizona, where it is absolutely picture perfect, beautiful. My gosh, I know it rained last night, but my gosh, the weather here has been absolutely perfect. And JT, I tell you, perfect. I know you're listening. Perfect golfing weather. Gosh, you need to move out of there. And speaking of over there, I'm going to be in Minneapolis again doing a workshop working with the scripts. We're going to be doing a lot of role playing, a lot of courtroom procedure, and it's just for entertainment and educational purposes only. It's only $50 a piece, $75 for couples, and it comes with $150 worth of scripts, which, of course, people make up their own mind. If they want to use them in court or whatever, they want to go visit with the tax man, they make their choices as adults. Why shouldn't adults? You see, I love the whole ridiculous notion that people are smart enough, they're responsible enough to pick the leader of the free world. Something so important as that, but they can't decide whether they want to use some questions or not, and if they have a problem to solve. And this is the No State Project. I want to bring my guest back up. We're having a great conversation. His name is Stefan Molyneux. He is a prolific, I'm going to say, anarchist or voluntarist writer. He's been on StrikeTheRoot.com many times and LouRockwell.com. He does a great podcast and has videocast at freedomainradio.com. I want to welcome him back to the show. Welcome back, Stefan.
Oh, thanks, Mark. Thanks. I appreciate that. Well, so did you know sorry, just to interrupt. I don't know if I might as well mention it here. I've thrown up my whole career, now for anarchism. I've handed in my notice. I am leaving the world of software executive, and I am going to take a swing at the Mark Stevens Road, I think it is, and try and make a living as a starving anarchist podcaster. So I can't tell you how long it's taken me in my life to finally achieve the status of kept man, but I feel that I've achieved it now, and that's progress for me.
Hey, fantastic. I'm glad to hear that. I haven't had a job in 10 years. and the whole corporate structure just sickens me. The whole idea of being told what to do, when to do. I mean, I still have things I need to do, and I keep appointments and things like that. But most of it's set by me, and this is the way I choose to do it. I wouldn't want to do it any other way, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it not having a boss. Although I think we may miss your video cast from your car.
I will actually quite look forward to the number of people not writing me to tell me what a dangerous and stupid thing I'm doing by talking in my car. I'm just, and threatening that they're going to find out who my insurance carrier is. Oh, the websites of those guys, right? I'm sure that there's going to be a clause somewhere, like if you're running a media show from your car, you're going to have to pay a little bit more in terms of insurance. But my argument is, because of course people aren't used to economics, they say, look, if I'm visually recording everything in my car, of course I'm going to be a really good driver because the evidence is going to be right there if I do something stupid. Yeah. So if everyone could have everything in their car recorded, everybody would be better drivers. But of course, people who aren't economically literate don't take that approach to things, right?
Well, you want to talk logically to a statist or someone who believes that they're in states and citizens, you're going to have a breakdown sooner or later. What I want to discuss too, Stefan, is you look at the violent nature itself of government, and you have something like Virginia Tech, and of course it was a tragedy, and we're discussing basically how this could and should have been avoided. But you look at the fact that it was a government campus. This was a government-run facility, okay?
Right.
Totally controlled by government. Whether people want to admit it or not, it's irrelevant. They are totally controlled by, they are government. When you become a public school teacher or you're teaching at university, you have an oath of office, just like the police do, or just like a judge does, or the Secretary of State. You are government. It's a government building, government property, run by government. And we'll just throw this out, just like on 9/11. Were the students protected that day?
No, and wherever the government is incompetent, we suffer with our liberty, right? So they screw up, and we have to pay. And that is the eternal problem with living at the end of a barrel of a gun. Every time a mistake is made, you blame the citizenry and take away more power from them. But, of course, it means that you're delivering more power to the people who've made the mistakes, which have resulted in the deaths of dozens or, sometimes many, many more people.
Yeah, and one of the things I pointed out, and, it's a major part of what I talk about, is the fact that, well, it's people will look at this and say that the government failed, because their stated purpose, which I've mentioned, of course, again in depth last week, and I'll say it again. It always bears repeating, apparently, because we're not living in a governmentless society yet. The stated purpose of government, whether you're in the United States or England or Australia, New Zealand, is supposed to be to protect life, liberty, and property, and and I've read this before. This is, I'll give you the case citation in a second. This is the California Supreme Court, and it says, this is a direct quote, by the way, everybody. Police officers have no affirmative statutory duty to do anything. Okay, let me read that again. This is a direct quote. This is not my opinion or Stefan's. Police officers have no affirmative statutory duty to do anything. And if you want to find that case, I should post the whole thing on my website, but it is... Salza versus City of Antioch, and so here you've got a situation where, and I love how Stefan, that you're right in how they talk about it. Their apparent failure means the people who are supposed to be their masters and pay them, their customers, okay, have to be punished even further for their failure.
Yeah, no, it's a terrifying thing, really, when you look at not just the murderous results of this kind of moral reasoning, but, I mean, there's solely mind-bendingly X-dimensional, twisted pretzel logic that goes into justifying it. As people say, well, government is instituted among men so that we can protect our property, right? Because we're so attached to our property that the logic goes, what we want to do is create a monopolistic group of thugs with far more power to commit violence against us than we could ever resist. We want to give them complete control to take any property that they want from us, to take our children away in drafts and send them to wars, to provoke foreign wars that results in the death of us at home, and to have massive amounts of guns pointed at us, and to take any of our property at any time that they want, because we're so into protecting our property. I mean, the logic of that is just completely insane. That's like saying, I love my car so much, I'm going to drive it off a cliff. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And people just accept the power structures that exist and make up reasons as to how they could conceivably be justified. Nobody ever sort of reasons from first principles. I think the anarchists and some of the libertarians are doing a very good job in this. The objectivists maybe not so much, but because they have a bit of a holy text, right? And I say this as somebody who, was a love, dying man and so on, but the reasoning that people put forward to justify the existence of the state is not reason from first principles. It is always, let's find ways that we can get people to stop questioning the power that exists, and we'll put forward reasons like, you were born here, or to protect your property, or, well, it might be bad, but it would be a lot worse without the state, and so on. And none of it stands up to even the most cursory logical examination. It's really quite wild.
It is. I had done Coast to Coast. I had done the newer show. I did not do the huge 450 affiliate shows. And I'm not saying that because I'm trying to put it down. I'm just trying to tell everyone which one I did. And when I brought out the whole thing about protection, and the only thing that makes someone a citizen is the duty of protection in return for the duty of allegiance, and that there is no duty to protect, which I just read directly from the law, what the host did was say, I'm going to lowball the definition of protection. And, I mean, it's like, wait a minute. If you change the definition of protection to suit your need, then you're changing what a citizen really is. So his whole focus, what he tried, and he's not the only one that's done this. I don't want to paint Ian as just the only guy who's ever. He's not. He's just one of many. It'd be nice
if he was the only guy who ever did it, though. I'd make our job a little easier.
Yeah, that's a nice thought, Stefan. He did not want to accept the basic fundamental lay and legal definition of the word protect, which means to prevent. They're synonymous. Okay, it's the same thing. When it's just so do you hire a bodyguard to just beat the living crap out of the guy who kills you? Or do you, I mean,
right,
you know,
right.
I mean, it's to prevent the guy from killing you in the first place, you know, and this is to someone who's on this whole thing, like many people are, unfortunately. We'll go pick on the right again, about so-called illegal aliens. And but if the only thing that separates you and I, allegedly, from these so-called aliens is the duty of allegiance and the duty of protection, and you get rid of the duty of protection, whether you lowball it or legally there is none, you've just destroyed the entire distinction between you and a so-called alien. How that's not seen.
Help me understand something, because I really do get, and that's an excellent point, I really do get baffled by this, Mark. I mean, and it really does trouble me, because I still have affection for libertarianism, right? I mean, I know that it's misguided and it draws people off from the truth and so on, but still, you know, it certainly was my path, right, to the truth, so I'm not going to sort of speak. But there is a really troubling aspect of libertarianism that is really centered around this illegal immigrant situation, or this illegal immigrant thing. And I'm not sure exactly whether it's some sort of, I don't know, daughters of the American Revolution, nostalgia for the good old days of slavery and no rights for women, but there does seem to be a real challenge in libertarian circles around this sort of very central question of illegal immigrants, in a way that there's not about the welfare state. Right? So, I mean, there's no libertarians who say, oh, yeah, the welfare state's great. I mean, by that definition, you're not a libertarian. But I've come across a fairly disturbing number of libertarians who seem to find that the government has no purpose whatsoever except for, you know, protecting my right to own a gun and driving out all the illegal immigrants. And there seems to be some of that around. Do you know why that is, or like where the short circuit occurs there? People think that moving from one place to another is somehow some big crime. I mean, or they say, well, the problem is that the government provides these services, and then when people take advantage of them, the problem is not that people are taking advantage of these services, but that these services are provided by force to begin with. That's what they say about all these other programs like education and welfare. But man, with this illegal immigrant thing, it's just, you can almost see the sparks flying and the smoke coming out of the ears, because it seems like the principles don't make it ashore.
Yeah, you know, I had pitched a show by someone who claims to be a libertarian. He was on he stuck to his principles as far as the war in Iraq. He was on a Clear Channel station here in Phoenix, and he was fired because of his stand. He was probably the only host on a Clear Channel station that absolutely refused to support the war. And he called himself a libertarian. I don't think he's a libertarian. So he does a show here, and someone I'm very fond of, who's part of the, you know, libertarian, I'm not going to give his name out, was producing the show, and he's about as libertarian as you would think you can get. And, you know, his whole thing, don't vote. And when I had said, because I'm pitching again on this guy's show, he says, give me something topical. And I said, all right. I have an article that there's no such thing as an illegal alien. And he said, by whose opinion? Whoa!
I'm sorry, did I just step on a landmine, or is that missing? I can't see.
Like, oh my gosh! I'm like, I said, well, you're not for nothing, but it's not a matter of opinion; it's a matter of fact. Read the article, and I think it has to do with this, you know, the patriotism. I think that the libertarians, at least the ones who still vote and think you can do things that way, they have this need, like you mentioned earlier, to be part of a group. And to identify as an American in the American government, and I think it's monstrous for people, whether you're libertarian, and the objectivists have the same problem, I believe. It's just not to the same degree. That they have this, there's a problem with admitting that the whole American experiment was a scam. It was a better form of slavery, and people don't want to admit that Thomas Jefferson, well, he wrote some great things. He wrote some really good things. He was a great writer. But he still was a slave owner, and he still was a statist, and still controlled violently the life and property of other people. There's no...
And there seems to be good evidence to have kids, right? So I don't believe that you can have consensual sex with somebody that you own as property, right? I mean, that's not possible morally. So, I mean, we can throw, without wanting to sound too inflammatory, but we can throw some pretty technical charges of rape at the fellow, no matter what a wonderful writer was, and Monticello was a beautiful house, but, you know, even by the standards of the time, sex with slaves was considered rape, and it's not a very good thing to do.
Well, no, and a lot of people may say, well, Jefferson was trying to be practical at the time, that he kept the slaves on his property because had he released them, they could have, you know, given them their freedom. They could have, you know, been captured and used as slaves again. And, you know, even if you get out of the whole slavery thing, it's just like, yeah, I love the writings of Patrick Henry, but he was still the governor. Okay,
right.
You know, he says, "Give me liberty, give me death." I mean, that could have been something where, well, if you want your liberty, I'm going to kill you because I'm the governor.
Right. But what you do is you speak that out, and whoever cheers, you say, okay, you put them in a book, right? You take their names down, right? Those they cheer for that. We want to keep our eye on them.
Yeah, I think, and to get back, I really, and this is just me, and this is just in my experience because this is an extremely emotional thing, and I've had people that I knew, and we spoke about this earlier, that one guy in particular, really good friend of mine, and I helped get the IRS office back, and a lot of things, helped get a DUI thrown out, but he told me he hated me intensely for about 6 months. And I said, why? He says, because you ripped my reality out and didn't replace it with anything.
Wow, listen, I've got to ask you the question, how did you get it down to 6 months? If I could get it down to 6 months with people around me, I would consider that a personal triumph. That would be like the Olympic gold medal of anarcho-capitalist conversions. 6 months, my God, you've got to write a book about that. How to have people hate you like grim, bloody death for only 6 months. And I think everybody would cheer and say, great, it's only 6 months, that's wonderful.
Yeah, well, and I understand. I mean, there's a humor there, but, there's a huge grain of truth there. And I think it probably because I had already laid such a foundation, and it's not. And he came to realize his hate wasn't towards me, and anybody listening who has their reality shaken, whether you're listening to me or reading my book or one of Stefan's podcasts. The anger is you're projecting the anger at me, and the anger is really at yourself for being scammed and allowing these people to do what they're doing. So if you read some of the, like, I used to get people who would write me all the time because they would get the book thinking it was just one of these, oh, wow, he sounds great on the radio and he's impeaching cops and getting cages. And then they get the book and they don't realize that, because I didn't have enough time, let's say, on the show to explain it. It's hard to do in 5 minutes. That the reason why I can go into court is because it's all a scam. And so they say that they read the book and it's enlightening and infuriating at the same time. So when I first started getting these, I'm thinking, are you mad at me? And it's, no, we're not mad at you. We're pretty ticked off of what these people have been doing to us.
Right, and everyone who sees the movie The Matrix, I don't know if you've ever seen it, they see the movie The Matrix, and I always ask them, well, would you think he should have taken the red pill or the blue pill? Should he have woken up from the fantasy, the collective dream, and approached the truth in the Platonic sense, or should he have just, withered his life away in a collective fantasy? And everyone's like, oh yeah, no, I mean, he's take the red pill or whatever pill he took that woke him up, and yet in their own life, when people are faced with that choice, I think you're right. I mean, I think that they're mad at themselves, but I think at a more fundamental level, they're kind of mad at the authority figures who lied to them. Sure. I think that occurs at a pretty fundamental level as well, right? All the way back to our parents. Our parents say, you should do this because it's good, and you shouldn't do that because it's bad. Because we know right from wrong, we know good and bad, right? And then when you get a little older and you start to look at things more philosophically, you can then return to your parents and you can ask them questions, right? Because they're the gods of morality from your youth. Right, they told you what was right and wrong.
Sure.
And then you can ask them, and you can ask your teachers and so on, and they don't know, right? I mean, they're just sort of making stuff up and going with cliches, but they're presenting it as if it's real truth, that they understand and know for sure. And piercing through that veil of the appearance of knowledge rather than knowledge itself is really traumatic. I mean, emotionally, at least it was for me, it's quite a roller coaster. Now, the relationships that survive flourish like the beautiful things that they are, but you have to be prepared to shed some baggage, I guess.
Well, you're absolutely right, and as far as the parents, we have to remember this is a multi-generational problem. It's not just a matter of the government hoax, this public relations scam started in the 50s.
Right,
this is something that their parents did it to them and their parents, and a lot of this it comes out of fear. When you go back to, let's say, around the time of the American Revolution, at least statistically, if you can believe the books, the majority of people just didn't care. They just wanted to live on their farm and do their thing. The ones who wanted the revolution were the same ones who are in control now. They were the big, rich landowners, the big business. I mean, John Hancock, I'm not taking away that the man put his life on the line. A lot of people who signed the Declaration of Independence literally put their lives on the line doing that. But they didn't want. They wanted to be in control. They didn't want to be controlled. But it's not like they didn't want to control others.
Yeah, meet the new boss, right? Same as the old
Same
boss.
as the old, exactly. So, because if you look and you do, my new book is going into a lot of detail about the revolution, what happened, and until that comes out, Carl Watner of voluntaries.com has done a really good job also of talking about some of these subjects. And one of the reasons why someone like John Hancock was so incensed by what the king's servants were doing, the soldiers, was the Navigation Acts, the forfeiture of their ships. I mean, you're talking about entire ships with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of product being taken by the king and his men and the local magistrate. And so that really was what drove the revolution, was the Navigation Acts.
And the billeting, right? I mean, they just got to put up all these soldiers, and they each had a house and home.
Well, right, and so here you've got these rich businessmen who were the primary force for the revolution, the Navigation Acts, which was costing them dearly. And one of the very first things they did, Stefan, after they declared independence, in all of the 13 original colonies or states, they all passed their own Navigation Acts.
Well, sure, absolutely. You shoot the mafia guy just so you can get control of the mafia empire, right? And then you'd say, look, I brought you freedom. It's a different guy on the stamp, right? So,
yeah.
But there's this fantasy that there's a good gun, and I call this in a recent podcast, is the fantasy of the golden gun, right? There's this fantasy that is very, very hard for people to give up, Mark, which is that violence can be used by good people in a good way, right? That somehow, somewhere, there was some golden gun that people picked up, and the American Revolution is a big fantasy with this, right? That people say, well, we got rid of tyranny, we put in a small and limited government, and then just mysteriously things went wrong because of X, Y, or Z, right? I mean, everyone has it. But the problem is that once you say, it's never good to beat my wife, you sort of made a good step forward in ethical progress, right? That there's no way that you can pick up a gun, point it at a peaceful person, and achieve anything other than the destruction of civilized society. And it takes time, and it decays over time, and we still have a fairly robust society left, and we have this communication medium, which lets crazy lunatics like you and I on the air to talk to each other and to others. But it's when you give up on the fantasy of the golden gun that I think you really do make a lot of progress. I mean, but one makes a lot of progress in ethical development to say that there's no time or place where the initiation of the use of force is morally acceptable, and it's very hard for people. They also want some boy. If we gave Jefferson that gun, man, he'd be, he was great, and the revolution. But of course, what you're doing is saying no. All that happened is this black evil gun changed hands. It didn't get turned into virtue.
Yeah, I think that, I know that it's a mistake to call him a founding father, but Thomas Paine he would have been like Gandalf the Grey. He wouldn't have taken the gun.
Right.
And so I believe that the central message of Lord of the Rings was that it doesn't matter who has power. The power itself is the problem. It has to be destroyed. The idea has to be destroyed.
Yes, the idea that we can use violence to achieve anything other than destruction is something that human beings just have a very tough time letting go of. But I think that in our own small ways, we're just trying to shine that light a little bit lighter and open people's eyes to this. And it is a very difficult thing to go through. But boy, is it ever fantastic when you're through and you see things with this kind of clarity.
Well, you see through all the nonsense. You don't have to get caught up, like you mentioned, about the minutia of every little detail. When they're talking about whatever's problem, whether it's schools. Oh, you shouldn't have government. It all should be private. The market forces will take care of it.
And people say, well, how would this kid get educated? He's from and it doesn't matter. It's like saying, well, you can't get rid of slavery until you can provide a job for every single slave. It's like, well, how's Joe going to get at work? What's he going to do? He's got no skills or whatever, right? And it's like, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what happens after you do the right thing. You just have to do the right thing. Yeah,
and I like how, I don't know if you're familiar with Carl Watner. He does voluntaries.com. He's got some wonderful writings up there, and one of the things that he talks about is that if one takes care of the means, the end will take care of itself.
That's very well put.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Stefan, why don't you give your contact information again?
Sure. Free Domain Radio, www.freedomainradio.com. Thank you so much, Mark. Well, it's a great show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on, and we're going to have to do this on a regular basis. Have you back again. Stefan Molyneux, thank you again for